Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Crossover here. It should be October 17, and here we are again in the Blue Room. So we're going to wrap up, well, mostly wrap up the commandments this morning. Next week we'll have a close up of the commandments, and there'll also be a quiz over that unit. So make sure your lessons are caught up and things like that. Also, a mention, if you haven't submitted homework and pictures and texts and things of your homework, those starting to mount for a few of you. So make sure you get those in. Go back, double check, make sure you've done them and passed them on to me. It'd be a shame for us to get halfway through the class and some of you just have these big gaps in the grading and so forth. So open up your workbooks, page 33. Open up your catechism to page 110, and we'll be taking a look there in our class time together. So we're going to actually encompass 3 commandments, and the reason we can do that is really commandment 9 and 10 are similar because they both deal with coveting. So take a look at page 33, and we could look at these in your catechism, or we could look at them right there on that page. All 3 commandments are there, so follow along with me on page 33 in your workbook. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. This is the 8th commandment. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not tell lies about our neighbor, betray him, slander him, or hurt his reputation, but defend him, speak well of him, and explain everything in the kindest way. Now, we could read the other 2 commandments, but what I want to do now is I want to focus just on that 8th commandment for a moment. Guys, it's been my experience over the years of working with young people and youth and so forth. This particular commandment, this one and the 4th commandment and maybe the 2nd commandment, not misusing God's name, are some real struggles for teenagers. And that's not a criticism. It's just some of those areas in your life that I think are much more sensitive to pay attention to. These are the things you ought to be watching for because how we talk about people around us is not just a question of is it kind or is it polite. That we recognize that when we harm someone's reputation, that it damages their ability to contribute in this world the way that God built them to. It's not altogether different than going up to a car with a baseball bat or a sledgehammer and then just breaking windows and denting the car. That's what speaking poorly about someone does. It harms the effectiveness of what God built in that person. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what that is and how important it is. But I want you to understand this isn't just, hey, listen, tell the truth. That's keeping this commandment. This is dealing with something that's really that's quite important to God. Obviously, he takes one out of the 10 commandments and focuses on it. But he also speaks to it often. He talks about how dangerous or powerful the tongue is as you speak of someone or encourage someone or criticize someone. So drop down a little bit. I want to walk through this. We'll come back and we'll pick up 9 and 10 as we go through the workbook. But I want to just focus on this false testimony against your neighbor and what it says to avoid and what it says to do. This is one of those commandments that I think that's really clear as we look at it. I want you to look all the way at the bottom of the page, and there's this kind of orange box divided into 2. And in your catechism, if you look there here on page 110, we're going to look at page 8 or question 84. It's at the very bottom of page 110 in your catechism. How do we fear and love God in keeping the 8th commandment? So what do we have to do to keep it? It says we fear and love God by not speaking about others in ways that harm them. And then it breaks it down. Harmful speeches, take a look at the next page, letter A. One is telling lies about our neighbor in everyday life or in a court of law. It takes it as seriously as we perjure ourselves on the witness stand. Or letter B, go halfway down the page after some supporting scriptures there. Letter B, it says, or betraying our neighbors by making public their private faults or secrets. You may know something, and remember, let's not get lost on this. Remember that when the Bible and our catechism speaks of neighbors, it's not just talking about the people who live next door to you, across the street from you. It's anyone that is in your circle of influence, anyone around you that you interact with, whether it's verbally, physically, or whatever. And so if you happen to know a person in your class, that's an easy way to look at this, in your school class. I know many of you guys move from class to class, but if you knew a secret about a person in your class, that would be very harmful to them. Excuse me. And you've thought, I'm going to share that with other people because they'll find it interesting and you'll be the center of attention by telling that. This is what would harm them, all right? I'll give you an example. Please don't, point fingers or, giggle about this at this point. But there was a young man in one of my churches way back when, probably about 10 years ago or so. And he struggled with something that was really embarrassing. I'm not going to tell you what it was, but he struggled with it very late into his years, right? Well beyond everyone else. And because of that, there was a sense of shame that came with this difficulty for him. And not too many people knew about it. But a friend of his, well, it's somebody who knew him, did know about it, and one day decided he was going to share it with a bunch of people in the class. And the ridicule and the abuse verbally that came from that was just heartbreaking to see. And once it's out, you can't kind of, as they say, put that genie back in the bottle. And so it was just heartbreaking for this young man until he actually left the school. It was so embarrassing and would not go away as much as teachers attempted to stifle it and so forth. And so that's the damage. This person was wounded because someone decided to share something that was secret about them and something that could be harmful, right? Harm them socially. Or letter C, slandering our neighbor by rushing to judgment, complaining about their spreading rumors. Okay, so every one of these things has to deal with something that we're going to talk about. So in the bottom there, under harmful in the box on your worksheet, under harmful, I want you to put 3 little bullet points. The first one of the ways it's harmful is we tell lies. Right? Tell lies about our neighbor. The second bullet point, the example I gave you of this young man, we tell secrets. Right? And so tell lies, tell secrets. And the last one is slander. Slander is to lie about someone, to tell half-truths or to exaggerate about them that's harmful. All right. This is not bragging. That's kind of the more positive version of it. I'm better than, the story is better than it actually is. Slandering is kind of making the story more negative or a fact more negative or more condemning. So those are the harmful things, but here's what's helpful. At the very bottom of page 111 in your catechism, very bottom, it says, we fear and love God by speaking constructively. It means we build them up, construct, about others. This includes 3 things. Defending our neighbors, right? When others speak badly of them, we stand up for them. You often do that when somebody says something about a friend of yours. You're like, no. They're not like that. No. They're better than that. They really are smart. They really are kind. You're building them up. Or letter B, next page, 112, letter B, it says drawing attention to our neighbor's good qualities. When you think about it, that's kind of the opposite of telling people about their faults and their secrets. You tell people they've got good qualities. You speak well of people. Right? And that's a positive take on this commandment. Or letter C, seeking to understand our neighbor's actions in a positive light, explaining it the kindest possible way. I find that I try to do that many times as a pastor, when I was a teacher. When somebody would behave or act a certain way that might be perceived as a negative, you try to understand why would you do that? Why would you say that? Why would you act that way? I often found that when I was a teacher, I was a high school teacher before I was a pastor. And as a high school teacher, I would often see students, not that much older than many of you, act out in class. And when there became a habit of that, I realized there's an old adage in psychology that says, hurting people hurt people. when they're hurting inside and they're struggling with something, they often lash out in a way that's harmful to people around them. And so when you'd see some action, you'd say, listen, that's not just coming from a place of evil. That kid is just evil. Instead, you kind of go, what is it that's driving them? Maybe they're struggling with something. So you're trying to understand it and then try to put it in the best context. You're like, well, they've got a lot of other things on their mind and difficulties, so we're going to show a little more grace. Be based on what they said or did and so forth. And so those are the positives. So on that orange box at the bottom, how can we be helpful to our neighbor in regards to this commandment? 3 bullet points there. The first one is defend. Defend your neighbor's reputation. Okay, defend it. Second one is find good in them. Right? Find good in them. Share the good in them with people. Because a lot of people that are critical, you can turn that right around by going, no, there's some really good things about this person as well, and highlight those. And then the last one, the third one, is seek to understand your neighbor and maybe why they do or say the things that they say. So those are the negatives. These are things to avoid. These are the things that we can do to build up. So turn the page and let's deal with this. By the way, for homework, this week, fill in those 3 questions right above that orange box. The ones that say, why is having a good reputation so important? And those next 2 after it. I want to hear and see your guys' thoughts on that. So fill out that underneath, consider this. Put a little note right now. Do for homework. Put a little HW for homework on that if that helps you. And I'll take a look at that when you guys submit it. Top of page 34. As we look at this, some tough questions here. Is it ever okay to withhold the truth? Is it ever okay to withhold the truth? I want you to, in your catechisms, look at page 113. We were there before. It's on the right side now. At the bottom half of that page 113, you're going to see a scripture passage, Exodus 1:15 through 20. I want you to follow along with me as I read this, because it asks there, question number 87 in red right above it, are there times when not speaking the truth may be necessary? And the answer is yes. Withholding the truth may be necessary when speaking the truth would result in injustice or harm. And so, in fact, what I'd like you to do is that answer right there. Yes, withholding the truth may be necessary when speaking the truth would result in injustice and harm. Write that down right underneath in your workbook, underneath tougher question. Do that right now. And while you're writing that, I'm going to read this verse out loud. So write that down real quick, just those 2 lines, quick as you can, underneath that workbook question at the top, page 34, as to what other special circumstances might you have. And we're going to add to that in a second. Okay, so most of you should be done with that. Exodus 1, listen to this. In your catechism, you were looking at it. Then the king of Egypt said to Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other Puah, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, this means when they're about to deliver a baby, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. This is back when Pharaoh, when all of the Hebrews were slaves and forced to make bricks for building, the pyramids and things for Pharaoh. This is why Moses was sent to free them, because they were being persecuted. Pharaoh actually said there's too many male Hebrews and they may rebel and overthrow. So he tells these midwives, these are like nurses almost, that help the Hebrew women deliver their babies, everybody to deliver babies. And they said, if you ever see a male Hebrew baby that's born, you're to kill it immediately. And it's awful, terrible thing to pass an edict from the Pharaoh. But so here's what happens. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this? And let the male children live. The midwife said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and they give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. So this starts to touch on The fourth commandment, right? Fourth commandment says, honor those in authority. So here's Pharaoh. He's king. He's the leader of Egypt, and he gives a command to do this, right? Midwives, if you come in contact with a Hebrew woman that's delivering, and if it's a male child, you're to kill the baby. This is where the fourth commandment runs into a sinful world. See, we are to obey those in authority unless the authorities tell us to do something that is counter to what God tells us. Obviously, killing those babies would be against the fifth commandment, do not murder. And so they say, and Pharaoh brings them in and says, boy, we got a whole bunch of male babies. How come you didn't kill them? And they said, oh, the women give birth before we get there. That wasn't true. And so they didn't tell the truth, because by telling the truth, it would have compromised the safety of those male Hebrew children. And so they lied about it. All right. But it was specifically to provide help and protection. So under that, in your workbook, under that section where it says tough question, I want to put an example underneath that too, right? We said that it's about withholding the truth when speaking the truth if it results in injustice or harm. One example is when Germans would hide Jews in their houses or someplace to protect them from the Nazis, right? During World War II, jot that down. So they would, bang on their door, the Nazis would, and said, do you have any Jews here? And nope, we don't have any Jewish people here at all. That would be a lie. And if they were hiding them. But they were doing that in order to protect them. So there is a time in which you could speak something that is untrue for the sake of protecting someone, but it has to be protecting someone or protecting something that would be in line with God's law, right? You can't say, mom and dad asked who broke the window, and I'm going to lie to them and tell them it was my little brother or little sister so that I don't get punished. That's just a lie. That's wrong. If it was something like, the Nazis looking for Jews, or these midwives in Exodus protecting the Hebrew children, that's what the only allowance is for that. So down underneath, let's keep going here. Rumors, because one of the things that it talks about with slander in the 8th commandment, God says don't slander at all. And so what is a rumor? Here's the definition I'd like you to write down. Write this down underneath that. It is information or a story that is passed from person to person, right? It's information or a story passed from person to person, but has not been proven to be true. But has not been proven to be true. Information or a story passed from person to person, but has not been proven to be true. So that's a rumor. And you know what rumors are. I know you guys know that. We talk about them like, hey, did you know what I hear? Or what I heard of so-and-so? Those are rumors, right? And so down underneath in those little purple boxes, it says do this as an example. We're not going to go through, don't have time for that. But I want you just to kind of, underneath rumor, just put a question mark. We could make any number of rumors written down there. But here's what I want you to have as your response to a rumor. I think it's pretty much a standard response to any time somebody says, hey, have you heard about so-and-so? And they share some slanderous gossip with you. It's something negative. It's something embarrassing. It's a secret. It's a fault. Something about someone else that's bad. And I think you just simply say 3 words. Is that true? Jot that down in that box. That's how we should respond to rumors. Is it true? Because if they're like, well, that's what I heard. Well, then it's not reliable, right? It doesn't matter even if it does turn out to be true. If you don't know it's true, we shouldn't pass it on. Because again, remember how our words hurt. I heard this once, that somebody once said this: when you tell a lie, it's like, if you tell a lie about a person, it's like going up into a tower, think of a watchtower or a bell tower, something like that, and opening up a feather pillow. Now, a feather pillow is obviously an old pillow filled with feathers. It used to be what they'd use for stuffing. And those feathers just go out and just blow all over the place. And you say, hey, listen, I lied about this person, and I shouldn't have, and I'm sorry. And now what should I do? And the old saying goes, now go back and get all those feathers and put them back in the pillow. See, once we lie about somebody and say those words, it's out there. And you can't really put it all back. And so that's why we should be so cautious about slandering, spreading rumors, being part of the gossip chain, because when those words go out, they go out. You can't retrieve all of them. Even if you say, I want to make sure I talk to these 3 people that I told. You guys know how this works. You tell one person, they tell a couple, pretty soon it's everywhere. And that's what's so damaging. Underneath that section in your workbook, it says Ephesians 4:15. It says, rather, speaking the truth, there's the key, in love, we are to grow up every way into him who is the head, into Christ, that is Christ. So it's this idea that God says, I want you to grow up glorifying God in Christ, and you do so by speaking the truth. And you do it because of love. You know what it means to say the truth about someone else, or to hold back sharing something that would be damaging to somebody, even if it's true. If somebody said you sucked your thumb until you were much older than everyone else around you, that may be true, but it's not helpful. It doesn't build someone up, right? So we don't speak every bit of truth that we know. We hold back truth if it would be harmful. Right? That's what we recognize. If what you say, it should always come from love, right? I want to build people up. I want to encourage them. I want people to see the very best in people. All right? All right, so that's the 8th commandment. Now, so the 9th and the 10th commandment, go back to page 33 in your workbook and turn in your catechism to the next page, and next page 115, and we'll follow along there. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so we do not scheme to get our neighbor's inheritance or house or get it in a way that appears right, but help and be of service to him in keeping it. Okay? Now, I'll tell you that this 9th commandment is about a neighbor's stuff. Remember, it's not just the one that lives next door to you. It's anyone around you. You want to focus on their stuff. Okay? The 10th commandment, it talks about you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or manservant or maidservant, or his ox or donkey or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Granted, that was written in a time when people had servants, had animals that you and I don't necessarily have, but we could probably say for you guys, right, we should not covet a person's friend, okay? Shouldn't covet their pets, or things that have an emotional attachment that's living, okay? So this is dealing with people, not things. The 9th commandment is really about things. 10th commandment is more about people and relationships and so forth. And certainly as you get older, right, a husband, a wife, children, and so forth. Now, we're not talking about kidnapping, right? That's a whole different wrong. What we're talking about here is pulling them away from the intended relationship that is there. Last week we talked about the 6th commandment, the 6th and the 7th. 6th commandment was committing adultery, which was violating the unity of marriage. This is a relational pull from that, to be able to say, I want to pull away your friend, your relationships, and do so because I want it. Right? That's the whole point of coveting, right? Is I want it. It's a sinful desire. In fact, the top of the page 35 in your workbook, I want you to define that. We could look at question 88, but I'll just walk you through it. What's a good definition of the word coveting? Write this down in that first box. Top of page 35. A sinful desire in our hearts. A sinful desire in our hearts to acquire something that belongs to our neighbor. Let me say that again. A sinful desire in our hearts to acquire something that belongs to our neighbor. All right? So it's not just, oh, I wish I had a swimming pool. Okay? It's like, no, I want that swimming pool. I'm going to find a way to have a swimming pool or use that swimming pool. I see my friend's new video game, and I've always wanted that video game, and I'm thinking about ways to have it. See, that's a sinful desire to just say, oh man, I wish I had a bike like that, and that's it. Just, I don't sin, I don't scheme, I don't desire it, I don't treat that person differently because of what they have. I just go, oh, I wish I had it, and it's just kind of a light muse, as it were. Coveting is going, I want it, and I'm going to seek ways to have it, or for them to lose it, or something like that. See, that's where the sin comes into play. The opposite of coveting, at least the way that the Catechism is going to present it today, is contentment, right? To be content. That's that square next to it. So jot this down. To define contentment is a state of happiness and satisfaction. All right? That's contentment, a state of happiness and satisfaction. So down underneath that, it says this, and this is kind of repeating what I was just saying. The 9th and 10th commandment are the last two of the 10 commandments. They are similar in that they both have to do with not being content and coveting instead. They're different because they have to do with coveting different types of things. So in broad terms, this is what I said. The 9th has to do with not being content with your things, so I covet someone else's things. And the 10th is I'm not content with my relationship, so I want other ones, right? So underneath we see those two little arrows, things like things that you might covet. I want you just to think of those things right now, jot a few of them down. What are some things that you might covet that someone else would have? Things. Jot down 2 or 3 right now, real quick. Covet things that you're like, boy, I want that, okay? And I want you to think of those things. So you've had a second or two to do that. So maybe it's the newest phone. Okay. Maybe it's the kind of clothes or the price of the clothes. Maybe it's some video games. Maybe it's a kind of a house, and so forth. But they're things. Okay. Now, I want you to think of relationships. What would be some things, relationships, that you might covet at your age? I want you just to think of what those could be. What kind of things would you covet? Saying, I wish that I had that, right? Think of what that might be. I can think of a couple for you guys, right? Jot one down, kind of what comes to mind. What are some relationships that you would want to have? And you're like, man, I really want that. I don't have it and I want it. And we'll talk really about what that can lead us to. So the one thing I think of for you guys, and I know some of you guys are younger, maybe too young to really care too much about this, but a boyfriend or a girlfriend might be a relationship that you see other people have, and you're like, boy, that seems like a good thing. And you're like, I want that. Now, the problem with wanting that, really seriously, is sometimes we change how we go about those things, right? We become almost desperate, or we compromise our own values to have something. Sometimes you find somebody else who's got a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and you're like, but I like them, and I want them as my boyfriend or girlfriend. And so you start to act in a way to, again, scheme to draw them away from this other person. This is what this is talking about. So not being content that God is going to provide good relationships for you in your life when the time is right, in the right way. The 8th commandment is going, nope, I'm going to do it myself, go my own direction and do this myself. One of the dangers is that we start to doubt that God is taking care of us. When we aren't content, we're kind of saying in that God is holding out on us. And that's a really dangerous stand to take as a Christian, because it erodes our faith that God's given you what you should have when you should have it. And that's important. So down underneath, let's put some more meat to this. With this in mind, in the organizer below, in that box, write down in your own words how we fear and love God by not coveting what belongs to our neighbor. And then write down on the right side how we fear and love God by being satisfied with what God has provided us and for others. So let's do this together. So on the left side, by not coveting, what does it mean? It means not plotting. Plotting, Plotting, plotting. When you plot something, you scheme. Not plotting to acquire your neighbor's possessions, right? And it might even be through legal means or proper means. But you just simply go, nope, I'm going to be content. Even though it's mine, I should get it, or I want it, or whatever. You're like, nope, I'm not even going to go about finding ways to get it. I'm just going to be content. The second way is, underneath that, not plotting to lure away relationships from my neighbor. Not plotting to lure away relationships from my neighbor. And then being satisfied, write this down, being thankful for all that God has given you. being thankful for all that God has given you. And secondly, help others, right, to retain what God has given them. Help them retain it. So if other people are trying to lure it away, if other people are trying to draw it away, you find ways to help them. So two really important categories of commandments today. So take pictures of those 3 pages. That's 33, 34, and 35. Snap pictures. Don't forget to fill in that one section on the first page where it asks those questions about that. And take pictures, email, text, send them to me, and we'll catch up next week. We'll wrap up commandments in this unit and have a quiz for you the following week. God bless you guys, and have a great Sunday.